Good afternoon. Well, thank you very much, first of all, Wspak, for granting this opportunity to host this webinar so that we can have a conversation about ergonomics. I am Francis Ayaga. I have over 15 years of working experience in various fields, manufacturing, commercial areas. Presently, I am the Safety, Health and Environment Manager, as also responsible for security for the Eastern Horn of Africa in Nestlé. I am a PhD student at Jomo Kenyatta University with a special interest in ergonomics. I think that would be brief enough for now. Thank you very much.
So I would like this opportunity to welcome each and every member and also non-members to this amazing webinar. I may just give action about the association for those who are not yet or have not heard about it. Wspak, in short, Workplace Safety Professionals Association, and it is a non-profit organization. So our aim is always to foster safe working environments and conditions across Kenya, Africa, and the aim is to go in the entire world. So it was established in 2019, and so far we have bring a lot of safety and health professionals together from diverse industries, people who are dealing with different safety issues. So that is what we do. For those who are willing to join either as an individual or organization, we also have that category as well. So you can always feel free to reach out to our office. And the main purpose for this webinar as well, apart from getting to understand about ergonomics, it's also a venue for us to interact and network. Thank you so much.
I take this opportunity once again to say thank you for joining this session. Today, we will have a conversation about ergonomics and why it's important for the business to look at ergonomics in our operations. I've already mentioned that this is quite a gray area for most people. Often I have discussions with people. They often tell me that, after all, this is just a best practice. It is not a legal requirement. I've had that quite a number of times for the guys who always engage with me on this conversation. But now, I would like us to first understand that our human body is built to hold a certain level of threshold of stress and is meant to work in a natural status. So with that in mind, let's look at then what is this thing called ergonomics. Basically, before I get to the definition of ergonomics, let me talk briefly about how did it start. It dates back to 1857. There was a Polish scholar by the name, he has a very tough name, called, I call it W. Stroboiski, who coined the word ergonomic from two Greek words. He coined it from ergon, which means work, and nomos, which means natural law or natural principles. Then this made the word ergonomics, which would literally mean working according to the natural law. So then much really did not happen in those days, but coming back to around 19th centuries and during the Industrial Revolution, especially during the Second World War, this is when this concept was largely applied. So especially during the World War, you know, soldiers used to spend a lot of time in the field, and they needed to sustain, to do more, spending a lot of time in the field, and therefore they needed to be comfortable. They needed to have designs of the equipment they were using suitable to make them achieve their intended goals. So in short, I'm talking about achieving productivity. So occasionally the learning came from, you know, using different equipments with different design controls, which would then result into errors, and that would then mean not achieving the objective of that particular task. With that, then what is ergonomics then? So ergonomics, this is a discipline of science that basically focuses on adapting the work to suit the worker. That is it. So when we say adapting the work to suit the worker. What does this mean? It simply means we have then to first, at the stage of designing, at the stage of assigning responsibility, at the stage of prescribing tasks, then we must have the worker at the back of our mind. So when then we say about the worker, then what does it mean? A worker has two characteristics to get the job done. We must look at the physical characteristic of this worker. Will that work suit that person? Of course, in a population, we have tall, short, medium people. So if you have a task, let's say, a control that is at a certain height, which is not factoring in short, medium, probably considering the tall people only, that is then not adapting that work to suit that worker's physical characteristics. But then, to achieve productivity or to get the job done, there's also the mental capability of a worker. So, and that's why during onboarding, I think there's this concept of wanting to match the person to the role, checking about the ability of an individual to comprehend and to apply the instructions or the procedure as prescribed. There are few elements when we talk about ergonomics that we need to keep at the back of our mind. When we say that ergonomics is about adjusting, adapting, modifying the work to suit a worker, then what does it mean? It simply means, in other words, there are other definitions that call ergonomics as human factor engineering. That simply means when designing, when doing modifications, the worker is at the center of it. And this then, linked to what I was just mentioning at the beginning of our at the introduction, that has really drawn my interest to look at the anthropometry. This is then the physical dimension of a person. And so when designing or when adjusting or setting up a workstation, we must consider the population, the distribution in the population in terms of the upper percentile, the 95th percentile, and even the 5th percentile. Because if, say, you have a desk that can only be used by a short person, then it means, what about the other category? If that desk is meant to be shared, what about the other categories of workers who probably are tall? Of course, considering the physical characteristics like the leg, the working space, and all that. Therefore, these three elements are very fundamental. To get the job done, we will use an equipment or machine. So, and there is the task and how that task is being performed. All this is done in an environment. So all these factors, these elements must factor in the physical characteristics of a worker as well as the mental capability of that worker. I wanted to share some key statistics about ergonomics. How is it outside there? What's the statistics talking about out there? Looking at globally, the number one cause of years lived with disability since 1990 is attributed to the health effects of poor ergonomics, specifically back pain. And considering that this has also resulted into chronic disability simply because of poor ergonomics, and this you could do further reading or maybe reference to International Association for Study of Pain, the latest report in 2023. Considering that the US is one of the most developed states in the world, considering that about 15 to 20 billion US dollars spent a direct cost that goes to handling workers' claims as a result of ergonomics-related injuries or work-related injuries associated with ill health coming from poor ergonomics. And this, you can see, is quite a huge chunk of compensation. And when this happens, you see that the impact is reduced productivity. And so this also a reference, just put the reference there. You could also check the work here. But interestingly, I like the statistics, how the UK has put it. The data that we have from Health and Safety Executive 2023 report indicates that about 1.1 million musculoskeletal diseases, shortenly called MSDs, have experienced. About 1.1 million workers have sustained or have experienced musculoskeletal disorders, which is the resultant impact of poor ergonomics in the workplace. But then looking at it in the business sense, considering 1.1 million people losing an average of 12.3, it was about 20 work days a year. So which constitute about 12.3 million work days in total. Look at that. It's a huge, significant loss to the economy and the business. So as I've mentioned, that average is about 20 days per worker in a year. I wanted to look at that and then relate it to our Kenyan context, considering that this data is available mostly on the developed side of the world because they have good reporting systems and tracking systems. So in Kenya, we know that manual lifting is capped at about 50 kgs. Looking at the data, the research from Springer and Nature 2025, it has indicated that there is quite a significant chunk of high incidences of back injuries. Remember, you will also see that we do not have sufficient data in Kenya to give us the real picture like the ones we've seen on the western side of the world that is developed. What does this mean if then we did consider good ergonomics? So the return on investment, for example, for countries that have practiced this, especially on the western side of the world, about $2 million savings per ergonomic program implemented. So basically, if you consider an ergonomic program, you will see a huge benefit. Let's see. In the Kenyan context, what does the law say? As I've mentioned quite often, people say it's a best practice. Today, I would like to demystify this fact and say that the OSA Act of 2007, Section 76, it talks of a few elements here: workstation design, equipment standards, manual handling, and supplier responsibility. So employers must adapt. I think where it's written must adapt would simply means there is no option. Must adapt workstations and tasks to suit employees, considering what I was mentioning, both physical characteristics and mental capability of the employee. So I don't think it's an option. Looking at the equipment standards, the same act requires that all tools, machinery, and personal protective equipment must meet prescribed safety standards, and these tools must be properly maintained. That's about ergonomics. It's clearly entrenched in our laws, but it needed interpretation. With a normal eye, someone might miss to get to realize that this is talking about ergonomics. So this also requires that employees must not be required to lift or transport loads that cause bodily harm. In reality, this is talking about ergonomics and is referring to handling of material load, manual handling of material load, which then is being capped at 50 kgs. So it also even caters for the responsibility, bestowing responsibility to suppliers, and manufacturers, and says manufacturers and suppliers must also ensure that the equipments are safe and have the relevant information that is suitable for the end user. Looking at this, I'm not sure, but I believe you will agree with me at some point that ergonomics is not a best practice only. It's also entrenched in our laws at Section 76, the OSHA 2007. And I've seen recently the DOSH team have been very keen, and I've also been looking at the checklist for audit. It's there. I've been very keen and highlighting more about ergonomic hazards as well. So I wanted to also look at some bit of statistics in the Kenyan context. I got this from NIOSH, that is the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety, and they have a system called DOSMIS. DOSMIS is available for all users. They can access. You just put in your account and then you can access this. According to this data, and of course this is the latest for 2025, about 29,167 workplaces have been registered. But I do believe that this is an improvement because there could be more workplaces than this, but this is what the official figures are as at now. look at the number of workers who have been medically examined, about 105. But how many workers are we in Kenya? That's a question you might not answer, but of course, you would believe that the number would be more. Look at the number of audits carried out. How many of these audits have factored in ergonomics? That's a question to think about, considering that 68% actually in the year 2019 to 2022, I was fortunate to carry out a research on ergonomics titled Ergonomics Assessment and Associated Risks, Ergonomic Hazard and Associated Risks in the Food and Beverage Company in Nairobi, Kenya. Just to let you know that the population under study was about 1,821, and I sampled about 328 thereabout. And the findings showed that about more than 68% of the workers working in these facilities are exposed to ergonomic hazards. But I also wanted to draw your attention that the 5 facilities with that population I've mentioned who are able to give access are those organizations with good manufacturing practices, good safety practices. What about the informal sector? What about other sectors? Now, looking at the accident statistics and the compensation, the data shows that about 9,706 of cases that have been reported have been notified to WIBA, Workman Injury Benefits Act. Of course, is an insurance scheme that helps compensate injured workers. Out of this number, what proportion would you attribute to ergonomic hazard being one of the leading causes of accident and injuries in the workplaces that is often not focused? Because I've seen that most of the time we focus more on the physical injuries like a cut, scratch, fall from height, slip, fall. But what about ergonomics? So then, why is ergonomics important? I wanted to draw to your attention that wherever there is a human being working or work is involved, there are elements of ergonomics involved. So ask yourself, where are human beings then involved in the workplace? It's everywhere where a human being is involved in a workplace, whether it's in an office, whether it's in a banking sector, whether it's in a manufacturing sector, whether it's in a construction sector, whether it's in a transportation sector, mining, all name them. They are all involved in work, and therefore ergonomics is involved. So relate to the numbers that we've seen just recently and see if you look at this picture in terms of the workplaces, there are many, probably more than what we've seen there. But then ergonomics is important because poor ergonomics conditions at work would definitely result into widespread injuries and illnesses. And most of these illnesses are related to work-related musculoskeletal disorders, which mostly targets the skeletal system. In terms of economic impact, this has a significant impact on the economy. Looking at when a worker is injured, there are a number of things involved. There are compensation. There is the reduced quality of life for that particular worker. Now that we've seen that back pain is one of the leading causes of years lived with disability since 1990, as I mentioned at the start of this discussion. Even if a worker is paid, what happens thereafter? Probably even this compensation would end up being spent on maintaining, or rather catering for the healthcare for the rest of the life of this worker who might end up living with lifelong disability. But what does this then mean to an organization? It means this worker then lost work days, and this worker comes back. Definitely, if the work condition is not improved, then there is reduced productivity. Why then should we consider doing, or rather implementing ergonomics in our operations? Good ergonomics boosts workers' morale. Recently, I work in a manufacturing setup, and when I joined an organization a while back, I found an area where workers were handling 50 kgs of loads, and the work process was quite manual. The area was dusty, the noise level was very high, beyond 90 decibels. And just to paint a picture, no one would want to work in that particular area. So the supervisor would struggle to assign people to a specific role. But then there was one individual who looked strong, and being a temporary employee, wanted to always got that opportunity because it looks strong. But what happened at the end of it? That's something you can think about. But then, having improved that particular workplace, we introduced the vacuum lifting system in that particular area to reduce the manual handling, where the leaks and the maintenance of the machines were done appropriately, and the relocation of the storage areas were brought near to the point of use where the workers were. These same employees began to love to work there, and I saw productivity improving from 18 tons a day to 54 tons a day. That is a typical example of how ergonomics can be beneficial to the business. So then this would lead definitely to job satisfaction and improve overall performance. Now, this is a dashboard as well that I was able to draw from the Ergonomist. This is from the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety. If ergonomics is implemented in the operations the way we have tried, we've implemented, not even really tried as such, but I do believe we've done quite a good job. And so far, I'm here to just highlight that we have attained 1,157 days without a single scratch. And we are very keen on reporting and very strong on psychological safety, encouraging workers to report every single injury. We're not tracking injury right now. We are tracking scratches. A scratch on the body is important to us. A near miss is important to us. And so we track that. And to date, as I've mentioned, because of good ergonomics practices, zero WIBA reports, processed WIBAs, we've not had any claims, not any fatality for the last many years, not experienced this. And you see this. So these are typical examples of how proper ergonomics implemented in a workplace can help improve the business. And these are the areas that are untapped. And that's why we're beginning to have a conversation. And thanks to Wspak for organizing this session. Now, let's look at a few risk factors. When there is poor ergonomics, then what happens? And what are these risk factors associated with poor ergonomics? Ergonomic risk factors, I would say, these are conditions, work conditions, that exacerbate or accelerate potential risks of sustaining an injury. And it emanates from the work method, the work process, how that job is being done. So, for instance, some of the few ergonomic risk factors in most process and operations, because they will vary depending on the nature of task that is being performed, is repetitive motion. So looking at our desks, probably those in the office, how often do you type on your keyboards? How many repetitive motions do you have, and how frequent do you do this? Looking at the manufacturing sector, at those seated at the end of the line, putting products in boxes, packaging, transporting raw materials from one area, scooping, all those activities, and the number of repeated motions depending on the nature of tasks. Those are typical ergonomic risk factors that increases chances of musculoskeletal disorder. And especially when lifting is involved, manual lifting is involved, then from the study, from my research, it indicated over 68% are exposed to these MSDs. Other ergonomic risk factors are like awkward work postures. I know often when people talk about ergonomics, it's very simply thought of like a chair without a backrest, without an arm, and manual lifting, and probably that's it. It goes beyond that. So awkward posture, where a job is involved. As I mentioned at the start of my presentation, that the gentleman who coined the word ergonomics mentioned that it's working according to the natural process laws or natural principles. So this then means that the body would want to maintain the natural posture as much as possible, a natural neutral posture as much as possible. Any deviation from that would result into an awkward posture, which is a major risk factor for accelerating injuries associated with ergonomic risk factor or hazards. Also, working on sustained static and sustained posture. Those of us who work on the desks, how often do you sit on your desks? For those of us who work standing, like I have a desk where I work standing, for how long? So an average of about standing for about 2 hours is better that you get a rest. Sitting down for about 30 minutes, it's better that you change tasks, you move. Of course, being in a static position would interfere with the circulations, which mostly resulting into accumulation of lactic acids in the joints. And the joints being part of the targeted parts for injury associated with our musculoskeletal system. The other ergonomic risk factor is the contact stress, exposure to contact and this is the one that most of us probably do without knowing. So the other one is forceful exertion, and there are many others. I just sampled a few. I decided to just highlight this pictorially. It sends more sense. The first picture that you see on top there, actually that is just myself on the workstation. And you see my arrows in red indicating that there's deviation. You see leaning forward, look at the position of the eye, look at the position of the hand, right? And so a number of them are put just to highlight some of the ergonomics risk factor. And of course, these things need ergonomic specialists, those who understand and be able to do proper ergonomics risk assessment and give interpretation and suitable recommendations that are tailor-made to specific tasks. So you can go on and on. Looking at the third photo, you see that is working while standing. Even the height of your PC, the computer that you're using, should be positioned and stationed well to avoid exposure to muscles, strain on the necks and the shoulders. Talking of environmental factor, I wanted you to look at the photo at the bottom. You can see how light is striking on that particular screen. Direct striking of light on the screen is now then harmful, causing a lot of glare. So these are some of the assessments. These are just a few of the assessments that I decided to put practically to highlight some of the ergonomic risk factors and hazards that we experience in various workstations. So in operational areas, those are some of the examples of these ergonomics risk factors and ergonomic hazards, especially when lifting. And this most of us are conversant with. How are we supposed to lift? What posture do we maintain? Are we lifting with our back? How do we carry? And so there are different tools. There are different tools carrying, lowering, all these present ergonomics risk. And you will agree with me that these activities, in one way or another, takes place in our operations. So it depends whether you are in engineering, look at that left bottom right photo, whether you are in warehouse, whether you are in an office setup, whether you are in transportation, you're exposed to a lot of vibration, whether you are a forklift driver in a static position for long, bumpy roads. So it applies everywhere. I have come to the end of this presentation of this. So I wanted us to have a conversation. So often I've worked with the different teams to support as an ergonomic specialist to be able to have this conversation, to be able to assist in ergonomic risk assessments of most of these tasks and discuss on possible solutions to reduce the effects of poor ergonomics in the workplace. So the tools that are often used is called a risk reckoner tool. I love that tool. I thought I put it here. Oh, there it is on the left side. I like this tool because it is very practical. And it is a tool that combines both all the risk factors, including the environmental factors in there, except where you need to do lighting assessment and vibrations. Those ones are not covered here. And neither are they covered again in other tools. So the other tools that I use, like REBA, considering the rapid entire body, depending on the nature of task that you're performing, whether it's ruler, there are many tools, many designs, but this tool combines the reckoner tools that I use, combines all these factors, and it's a practical tool, simple tool that you use and be able to get the risk score. The beauty about it is that it gives both qualitative and quantitative results, which can then enable ones to plan in terms of prioritizing where are the high ergonomics risks, which ones are medium, where do we need to pay attention more. I've come to the end of this conversation. I've put my contacts there. Thanks to Wspak. Those who would like to reach out, those are my details. And I'm grateful, ready for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francis, for taking us through this topic on ergonomics, which is surely an untapped area. So we'll just go straight to the Q&As. Let me first read the question in the chat box, then I'll give room to Samuel Michael to ask the next question. So Dorothy Nyabuto says, based on my understanding and reference materials on manual handling, the recommended maximum weight that can be lifted manually at waist level is 25 kgs for males and 16 kgs for female, depending on human anatomy. You mentioned that according to Kenyan law, the limit is 50 kgs. Could you please clarify which lifting level this applies to and whether it applies to both genders?
All right, that's indeed a fair question, and I truly agree. I agree with the person asking the question. It's true that considering various standards, like that is another standard, like the NEOS equations for lifting, calculations of lifting, different regions have different standards. So I was just mentioning the Kenyan context, what we have, and that's why there's need for us to do ergonomics risk assessment. So when you use these tools, like for example, the one I've just shown there, you will be able to whichever load that you use, it will be able to quantify for you to tell you whether that is a high risk level or a low risk level. But then depending on the reference standard that one would consider, like in the Europe side, the maximum lifting weight for most countries is 25 kgs. So you'll go to another country, it varies. But that does not mean, remember, the law puts the bare minimum. I look at my workplace, how we integrate the local requirements vis-a-vis the internal standards. We often consider the most stringent one. So if the internal standards, your standards are more stringent because what is put there in legislation is just the bare minimum that we need to achieve, but does not stop us from, I think it doesn't stop us from going an extra mile and even performing excellently, like what the person who posed the question raised that. So that's my how I think I would respond to that particular question. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Samuel Michael, please ask your question.
Thank you, Francis. That talk is very insightful. We do appreciate, and it is good to note their champions on ergonomics, because I think this is one of an, especially here in our context and chartered waters, and I think you are doing a good job. For the purposes of us learning and maybe upping our game in our places of work, maybe we may not have concentrated so much on ergonomics. I would request you to share some insights. Which strategies and initiatives have you applied in your place of work to promote and the ergonomics? Because I understand and I know in a workplace, there's various activities that involve ergonomics, be it manual handling, sitting position, use of screens. It is interesting for us to know which initiatives and strategies you have employed specifically at your workplace, and how are you enforcing them? How are you keeping them going so that you change the culture of ergonomics at workplace, and how are they being taken by the managers at your place of work? Secondly, I know especially in our context, the matters ergonomic safety has not fully been embraced in our workplace. Would you know whether there is any law? I know you shared the Act 007, OSHA 007, but is there a specific act or law in Kenya that puts it as a compulsory for workers to have safety officers or ergonomics at workplace? Do you have, or anyone in the meeting having a quotation whereby if a workplace have this number of people is supposed to have this number of safety officers or ergonomics? That may be helpful so that even as we lobby at our various workstations, we have a fallback plan when we are lobbying this. Thank you, and back to you.
Really, I love the question. It's indeed a very fair question. I mentioned the second question at some point, but I would come back to it. So your first question, if I got it right, allow me to repeat it just to be sure that I got it right. You're asking which strategies have I applied at the workplace to ensure good ergonomics practices are implemented, of course, with the benefits that have accrued out of it. Fair enough. Fortunately, I have a slide that would summarize briefly on my strategy. All right, this is the strategy that I've adopted. The strategy is based on 3 principles. That is the 3 pillars of safety. That is safety by design, safety by choice, and safety through caring leadership. So before I come here, everything starts from the top. You must have a policy that focuses on enhancing the workers' injury prevention and well-being of the workers. So with that in mind, these pillars have been fundamental in helping me or in helping our workplace to advance good ergonomic practices. Let me briefly talk about them. What you see there, we have a vision. We have somewhere we want to be. And so where there is no vision, where there's no vision or where there is no compass direction, you start a journey going nowhere. Wherever you reach, you can't say you are lost because after all, you are going nowhere. So our vision is to hit 2,000 days without a single scratch, as I mentioned at the start. So this is a pool that directs everybody from the top, aligned to the lower level, to knowing where we are going and understanding all sources of risk, of course, that I will also mention about ergonomic assessment. If you look at this, then safety by design simply means when we are doing our tasks, when we are designing, when we are doing supplies, when we are bringing people on site, then these ergonomics principles, these requirements are embedded in those requests. And this is a responsibility of each and every person. Let's say, for instance, we have a department or engineering department. They will make requests for contractors to come and do certain things. So in that request, these requirements are embedded there so that somebody before coming on site already knows the expectation and would not proceed without factoring that. And this can be achieved for an existing system by conducting a risk assessment. And so the risk assessment associated to ergonomics is often called ergonomic survey, which can be done, and this should be done to a specific task. Actually, you know, ergonomics is not like you come and survey the whole workplace unilaterally. You assess task by task because these tasks are not the same. Even the 3 people working on the same line don't experience the same conditions. One person is tall, another one is short, another one. So there are a number of factors. They could only be experiencing the environmental factors that remains the same in that particular area. If they're using different tools, of course, there will be variation and risks associated with that. So the second safety strategy, element or other pillar is safety by choice. This concept, it's worked wonders for us. I tell you, it's one of the things that I love most. And so we all know that out the Bards, we call there's this gentleman called Bards, Frank Bards. He says that about 85% of the accidents as a result of unsafe behavior, and about 15% do result as a result of unsafe conditions. Having a safe choice in every decision one makes, safety comes first. Safety becomes that choice. Safety is not a second thought. And so when you talk about safety, ergonomics is part of it. We have 2 things that we've done perfectly. Purposefully hunting for conditions within the workplace that could result into the next injury. Sometimes we call it, where is my next accident going to take place? And we go out to just look at in anticipation, not waiting for an accident to happen for us to then go look at the root cause. But it's like, where is your next accident? Where is your next injury? So in terms of ergonomics, the same questions we need to ask. Where is the next musculoskeletal disorder resulting from our operations? How will you know this? You need to do ergonomics risk assessment. You need a specialist in ergonomics to be able to do this for you and empower your team so that the knowledge is disseminated, so then the team can even go ahead and share more knowledge and learning within an organization. The third one is probably linked to your questions. How do leadership react to it? Do I get support? Entirely. You know, you cannot do safety in isolation. Safety should be part of the key business risks, and it should be part of the business strategy towards achieving the goal of the business. And therefore, the leadership aspect is very fundamental. And next time, if I get a chance to Wspak, I really want to talk about caring leadership with 5 elements that help support safety, including ergonomics. And under those 5 elements, there's what I would call work safer, work easy. I really love about that as well. So caring leadership. Here, when we talk about this, it takes me to what let me just highlight a few quickly because we still have some time. One is what we call leaders knowing their safety profile. So it starts from there because you will often find that these leaders perhaps they are not even aware about these risks. Now, like ergonomics is a very gray area and most people don't understand it. So you go to say about ergonomics, somebody's looking at you, what are you talking about? But if you look and analyze, and of course, you will also agree with me that there is serious underreporting when it comes to illnesses. So even me, actually, from my database that I have less illnesses than injuries. But if you look at it keenly, some could maybe not be reported because of the issue of work relatedness. Maybe some are related to other activities, which is very difficult to tell whether it happened at work or it did not happen at work. So knowing leaders being able to understand, so then there is an assessment that leaders need to do to know where they stand and they score themselves. And then after scoring themselves, then there is calibration to say, you know what, a few areas I've got to work in. Probably one of those areas is ergonomics, which seems gray for me. I would need someone to have a conversation, a deeper conversation with me about that. I've already highlighted just some of the things that you see in boxes, just some of the activities that are linked to those three pillars. I think I've answered your first question. The second question, I would like to go back to my original slide here. Look at that. This is good enough if perhaps you wanted to make a reference to a standard to talk to the management about it. But I would want to emphasize that it's better to go beyond compliance, because we are looking at the workers' well-being. It's better to go beyond compliance because we are looking at productivity, we are looking at efficiency, we are looking at, getting more out of our operations. So a happy worker is a safe worker, and that's a productive worker. But of course, you wanted to know which law you can anchor it. Look at Section 76 of the OSHA Act, and I mentioned, I would repeat, under workstation design, we all have workstations. Employers must. So when they say must, my English tells me that is not optional. Adapt workstations and tasks to suit employees. That is not optional. But this then would need interpretation. Someone would not easily pick it that this is an ergonomics requirement embedded in our laws. It would easily go unnoticed. And that's why we're having these conversations and saying, let's engage more to kick out musculoskeletal disorders out of our operations. So I think I've answered your question.
I believe Samuel Michael is content with your answer. The next question is from Collins Omulo. He asks, after how long should you alternate working while standing versus while sitting if you have a height adjustable table?
Fair question. Thank you very much. I had mentioned it, but thanks for highlighting it. Well, if you are standing, at least 2 hours, at most 2 hours, not at least, at most 2 hours working standing. I work standing here, the one I've highlighted. I change, but I'll prefer to work standing. But what is recommended is about a maximum of 2 hours working while standing. So you can change the task or take a break. But if you are seated, at most 30 minutes. The other recommendations, and of course, I've put my contact here, can always reach out to me, we discuss further. Other recommendations that are meant if you're working in a sitting position, what you can do to enhance good ergonomics, what you can do to enhance good health and well-being. I hope maybe that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yes, let me go to the next one. So there is another one from Matthew Kiplagat. Do you think the Kenyan's OSH laws sufficiently covers ergonomic hazards at workplace? If not, what are your recommendations? Then part B of the question, then in your study, which standardized tools did you use to assess the ergonomic hazards in your study settings? That is from Matthew.
All right, thank you. Well, this is my personal opinion because he has sought for it. I think that there is room for improvement because it's just a few lines under Section 76 of the OSHA Act that highlights requirements for ergonomics, and it is not even direct. You have to interpret, you've got to, read in depth. I think it would be better as a nation, as things continue to change and there are new emerging risks. As you see, AI is coming up here. There's workstations at home. There are many tasks that are happening. It would be better to have a specific regulation that strengthens the outlined requirements for ergonomics. So I would really recommend that. I've seen, like in South Africa, for instance, sometimes I have an opportunity to visit there. They have a very strong, requirements that highlights this, and it's not optional. It's a very key thing there. And also, if you go to these other sides of the Europe, there are specific requirements that strengthens the main law. So my opinion is that there is always need for improvement. I've seen that the DOSH department have really tried to put a lot of input, even emphasis. Nowadays, even there's a bit of emphasis on it, but there's need to have a specific legislation that would strengthen what is already outlined in the main act, that is Section 76 of OSH Act. The other question, I used a number of tools. I employed quite a number of research instruments. I did workplace observation, which means I physically conducted the assessments on sampled workplaces. I mentioned that I sampled our 328 out of 1821 workers. So I also used questionnaires. I had a checklist with prescribed questions that would help me find out and then do the analysis. But also I was involved physically and I did conduct the assessment myself out of these workplaces.
Thank you, Francis. The next question from Mr. Douglas Katuri. Can you explain the process you use to evaluate a workplace for ergonomic risk factors with reference to all the aspects of ergonomics survey, for example, environmental, cognitive, physical, and organizational?
All right, fair enough. Thank you. Look at that tool that I've displayed there. This tool has all those factors. But as mentioned, I think you missed that part, which I mentioned that the environmental factors are done separately. This tool, looking at it, I think you could be able to see it clearly. It has the working conditions, which has a connotation of environmental factors, but not entirely. A few environmental factors that are not included here, like vibration, temperature, lighting, probably radiation, this tool is not covering that. Those are done differently and separately, but still under ergonomic assessment as well. Of course, this could also be done under those who do hygiene surveys, do that. But this is an area under ergonomics, one of the conditions. The second one is the tasks. If you look at this, there are varied tasks. I mentioned different tasks performed by workers varies, and they also varies with the industries. So you will see a number of factors are here, like how frequent, the repetitive motion, how you do these tasks. All those factors are catered for in this particular tool. Another thing that I would like to say, it also includes even the load factor. If you look at the fifth row, semicircle, it has the load and the weight, which is also an input into the calculation or tabulation of the overall risks. It's a contributor. The other point which work factors in here, you talked about environmental, you talked about cognitive, you talked about physical. So physical is what I'm talking about here. So when it comes to mental, that is in relation to your reference to cognitive ability, then this is then answered in terms of wanting to know the match, the fit between the worker and the work in terms of qualifications, in terms of understanding, in terms of, being able to execute that work. So this, again, is not in this tool, like the psychological aspect of it, the physiological aspect of it. The cognitive aspect of it. That's not factored in this tool. So it factors the design, it factors the machines, it factors the work factors, it factors the environmental factors, but not entirely. As I mentioned, a few that are not included in this tool, and these are done separately. And then now the psychological aspect of it, or rather the cognitive aspect of it, is also not included in this specific tool, but it's done separately during the assessment. I think that helps, clarifies. I hope it helps. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis, for addressing that. I hope the question has been handled. Then you have the last question from Reska. Please clarify that there is no specific standard of weight to be carried by the employees.
I mentioned what the laws says in Kenya. I mentioned that it varies depending on where you are. That's the first point to note. But then there is a specific one based on the risk assessment. Remember, I would go back here. Remember, I mentioned when explaining this interaction, these elements that are interacting, I mentioned that when it talks about adapting a work to a worker, you've got to look at the physical characteristic of that worker. So workers are different. You will find a small-bodied person, a petite person. You'll find a giant. You'll find a tall guy. You'll find a slender guy. And there are ladies here. Ladies could also be having, lactating mothers. You could be having expectant mothers. You could be having people already with pre-existing conditions like already sustained back injuries. You could be having people working in hot work environment. And also depending on the nature of task itself, those factors, there is a calculation that can be used to determine what exactly is each person supposed to carry. But then the other factors, like the ones I've mentioned, those then you have to understand as a supervisor or as a leader, knowing what's the capability of this employee. If this person perhaps is a petite person, will this person carry 40 kgs? Maybe no. But another gentleman will carry 25 kg. I mean, another guy can carry 25 kg because we are built differently. Our makeup, or rather our body composition, our strength, our abilities vary. And that's the essence of assessing the task and matching that task to that specific employee. So there is an employee who will be matched to carry only 10 kgs. There's one who will be matched to carry 25 kgs. There's the one that can carry 30 kgs. Of course, you will know that ladies will carry less than men. But if you use that equations, you can reach out to me. You can use that equations to know how then do you get this calculation done? Because the number of factors like carry load within the envelope area, you see, that would carry, you would carry slightly more than if you are carrying a load outside the envelope, which is then becoming a danger zone. So there's that kind of equation, that kind of calculation that would be guiding. I think that's how best I can handle your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis. So it's saying, however, apart from the ASHA 207 Section 76 on safety of workers, do we have explicit law or act states need for officers stroke department organization? So for example, say this number of workers need this number of safety officers, etc.
Well, I would answer that to the best of my knowledge. Personally, I've not come across that, but I think this is where risk assessment comes in. This is where the evaluation of workplace in relation to such activities and that is basically labor, like matching the workload to a worker. That's how we look at it. I'm not so sure, to be honest, if there is. Of course, I've not come across that. I don't think so, but I think that it's all about matching, the work, because when we say this specific number of workers must have, should require this, that can come from risk assessment. Because let's say, for example, maybe a workplace with 2,000, like I've gone to a place in South Africa where 1,800 workers are there. So you have a safety person who is maybe a safety manager, and then they have safety officers, and then the safety officers have safety champions, and then out of that, they even have permit issuers, specifically permit issuers. We have people who are only dealing with the contractors. We have people in projects, safety projects. So I would say it depends on the specific work, and again, based on the assessment in reference to maybe balancing the workload and matching the worker's ability to the work. That's how I put it. But I've not come across any in our laws. And if someone may have come across that, I think that person can help me answer. Personally, I have not come across that, but I think I would approach it from the point of matching the workload to the worker. So let's say one safety officer, will this person be effective to handle 3,000 workers? I may think no, but you might not need two, maybe safety managers. Maybe you might have a manager and other people who support from below. That's just my personal opinion and how I think I can personally respond to that particular question. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis, for addressing that. And let me go to Mr. Agosam regarding to the tool he had requested earlier. So he's saying the tool is corner tool. What's before corner? Kindly.
Yes.
Agosam, I
Okay.
don't know if that is the one you're referring to.
I also wanted to as some confirms, there are other
Mhm.
tools. The other tools that the 3D model is called the 3-cube model. That is also a tool that is recommended, practically implemented by ILO for assessment of ergonomic hazards. It's able to generate both qualitative and quantitative data, but needs a lot of interpretation. So this one, I really like. It's very simple, straightforward, and it enables me to easily, comprehend and interpret. But the other one needs a lot of interpretation, factors in three things, factors in the fit, factors in the movement and the posture. So back to your question. Thank you.
Where you have indicated using your hand the name of that specific tool itself.
Oh, it's called Risk Reckoner, Ready Risk Reckoner tool. If you look at where my hand is, it's sort of touching that name there, right? My middle finger is touching on it. It's called Risk Reckoner, Ready Risk Reckoner tool. It's ready, simple to use, very good.
Okay. All right. So thank you for clarifying that. So we have something here from Michael Odhiambo. The statement is, in a local context, unlike other safety and health related audits or assessments, which are guided strictly by the requirements of OSHA 207 and its subsidiaries, OSHA 207 doesn't go deeper into explaining what to look into when one is conducting an ergonomic survey. Maybe from your experience, could you give the bare minimum we should look at and report when conducting voluntary ergonomics survey for internal use by clients?
I mentioned that often people say the law does not require us to conduct ergonomics assessment. The law does. Actually, it is even written mandatory, but it needs an interpretation, and there are a few lines there. So I would like to draw your attention to section 76 of the Act. Go read that part if you get time. It highlights the requirements for ergonomics, but it is not, you need to interpret, because it talks about workstation design that requires that employers must, and the word must, if my English is correct, is to adapt the workstation and task. That's basically talking about one of the elements in ergonomics that we are referring to. The other one that they outlined there, I'm just trying to highlight the fact that it is not voluntary per se. It's a requirement. It's a requirement, and I'm referring you to section 76, right? So equipment standards. This is all about ergonomics, because the law says those tools and equipments, PPEs, must meet prescribed safety standards. What does that mean? Where does that fall? That's ergonomics. You get the point? But talk of manual handling, we've already covered that in our conversation. Employees must not be required to lift. So when we say employees must not be required to lift, it's basically saying suit the load to the worker. That is ergonomics. So it needs, that's the bit we said. It's not explicitly, outlined, but it is indicated clearly that this is a requirement, but needs interpretation. So that's why perhaps we need to have ergonomist. And I'm happy to have this conversation where we can now begin to discuss deeper and enlighten one another. The other question was there's the other bit that was talking about how often do we need to conduct this assessment? Was that the question? So it's not voluntary. It is, but as a best practice, this assessment, I would say every time, of course, you can do an annual survey, but every task that is being performed, this OSHA Act again says do risk assessment. Risk assessment includes ergonomic risk assessment. That's another thing that people forget. When we say go do risk assessment, it should include ergonomic risk assessment. But since this is a gray area and most people probably not quite familiar with it, we do other forms of risk assessment and leave out ergonomics risk assessment, which means if there's a work related to an injury, work injury related to ergonomics, you will be the workplace will be sued because the law says do ergonomics, do risk assessment. That risk assessment is not tied to physical risk assessment that we are used to. It's not only tied to environmental risk assessment that we're used to in terms of hygiene surveys and all that. It also should also include ergonomics hazards. It should also include ergonomic. And then now this specific section then talks specifically about ergonomic hazards, but in few lines, and perhaps would need some bit of interpretation. I hope maybe that might help.
All right, thank you so much. I hope it's very clear for all of us. There is a statement from Clapperton saying lagging indicators, which are economic related, can be an avenue for convincing management to come up with an economic policy. Part and parcel of the safety management system. So the last question from Steve Biko, he's asking if an employee consistently holds lower back after long hours at a workstation, economically assessed compliant with all OSHA 207 company policy, would you prove or that the root cause is actually
I think I got it. Let me reframe just to be sure that I'm going to answer the right question. I got it that if an employee consistently reports back pain and maybe the management feels they have done all that they could, could you prove the work relatedness? Is that the question?
Yes, that's the question.
My response to that question would be, I would pose questions to Steve. Have you done ergonomics risk assessment? Was it perhaps done by a competent person? Have you analyzed the tasks? Have you looked at the pre-existing conditions of that employee in terms of, was he already having maybe a pre-existing condition? What does your medical examinations indicate in terms of health surveillance? Are there tasks that are related to lifting, manual lifting, that could be traced back to the nature of work performed by employee? The other questions, those are questions that would help me say yes or no in summary. The other question that I would want to understand to adequately respond to this is this employee trained on how to lift? How often is this employee exposed to this work environment? Is he doing repetitive tasks? What is the maximum weight, maximum load, material load, or other load that employee is carrying? And how is this load being handled? If all those questions are no, then probably it would be no. But if part of that question, any of those questions are yes, then there's a possibility that it is work related. That's how best I would want to answer that question. Or rather, if I have a chance to do the assessment, I can be able to tell based on the results of the assessment. I should be able to perhaps tell. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Francis. So I don't think there is any other question. Let me just confirm from the Q&A. I would want to welcome organizing our Secretary General, Ms. Jeria, to take up from here.
All right, Mr. Ergonomics. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. My name is Jiraya Mora, Secretary General, Workplace Safety Professionals Association of Kenya. On behalf of the organizing team, I'd like to sincerely thank each one of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend today's webinar on ergonomics. We give a special appreciation to our presenter, who's been Ergonomics, Francis Ayaga, for his insightful and practical presentation. You have really helped us to understand how ergonomics plays a vital role in promoting health, comfort, and productivity in our workplaces. And your knowledge plus experience have truly enriched our understanding. To all our members who had the opportunity to join and you have listened keenly, some of you have participated by asking questions and providing comments. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that you are able to pick these rich knowledge, and my key takeaway today has been that ergonomics, or rather good ergonomics, does not only prevent injuries and discomfort, it also boosts morale, it also boosts performance and overall well-being. So this is the business case that we really were looking forward to discover in this webinar. So once again, thank you so much for your participation. We really appreciate your continued support to learning, safety, and health. For that, I wish you a good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.